Hey guys, welcome back to Create with Kim. In this video, I'll be sharing 3 easy homemade recipes that I make right here in my kitchen. Thank you for clicking on this video. Please consider subscribing and I hope you guys enjoy. The first recipe is homemade veggie broth. So you know those veggie scraps and part of your vegetables and herbs that you don't really get to use? Well, they're so perfect for this recipe, but I'm going to keep it simple with my usual ingredients just in case you want to try this at home. And my go-tos are celery, onion, carrots, and garlic. What's so great about this is that I don't have to peel my onions or my carrots for the broth. I just chop them up into small pieces, just small enough to blend once they're cooked. I let this cook for about 40 minutes. I use an emergent blender just because it's easy to wash, but before that I was using a blender and a food processor and they worked perfectly. I blend it enough where I don't see much chunks of the vegetables, but it's not completely smooth. So I'm going to use the strainer to catch the pulp and, as you can see, lose half of my veggie broth. This tastes so great as the base for soups, and sometimes I just warm it up and put my ramen in there and it's pretty much perfect. My next homemade item is nut milk, and I like to do a blend of almonds and coconut. If I don't have almonds on hand, then I go ahead and use cashews and it gives it a thicker, creamier texture. It honestly varies every time I make it because I eyeball my measurements. I use about 1/3 cup of coconut shreds, 2.5 dates because I have a big sweet tooth, and a handful of almonds, and then fill it with water up to the fill line. Okay, so I recently used fresh vanilla pods in this recipe and I was instantly converted. It tastes so much different from the extract itself, but I'll still have extract in my pantry. That's a must-have. I use a rubber band to hold the cheesecloth in place to strain the nut milk. But honestly, it's easier just to squeeze it with my hands. Okay, another honest moment. I usually just throw the pulp away because 99% of the time I don't use it, but I'm gonna try again. I'm gonna rely on my 1% to actually make good use of it. I know what to do with it, it's just laziness. I think the homemade nut milk tastes so great in overnight oats, but I mainly use it for my chia pudding because it's so perfect. The perfect sweetness, perfect texture. It just completes my chia pudding. Or I just enjoy it by itself. Okay, aside from this looking like tomato soup, my last homemade recipe is actually tomato sauce. I don't use tomato paste in my recipe, just fresh tomatoes, onions, and garlic, but I think the main key ingredient is probably the olive oil. These ingredients are simple, but the flavor is so good. So good. I'm going to show you guys 2 ways that I make it. The first is on the stove and the second is in the oven. Honestly, there's really no way to measure it. I just cut up enough tomatoes to get enough juices from them. I use a whole onion and about 3 garlic cloves. The proportions of each vary every time I make it. It really depends on what I have in the house at the moment. For the oven version, I toss my ingredients into a baking dish and add a generous amount of salt. When I say generous, I mean generous. Alright, like I said, the key ingredient I think is olive oil, which I realized I did not have much of at this point. And I bake it for about 40 minutes on 400 degrees. In the meantime, I prep the same ingredients for the stovetop version. And the cook time is so much faster, so I use this method about 87% of the time. Again, I'm low on olive oil, but I usually have double this amount. I saute the onions first, and then I add in my garlic, and then my tomatoes, and a generous amount of salt. So for me, I usually cook my tomatoes for about 10 minutes just because I like the freshness of the tomato taste. And then I use a utensil to just squeeze the juices out. Only because I'm using my immersion blender, I just try to help it out. If it was the food processor, I'd just pour it all in there. And I did add in some sugar to cut some of the acidity. I don't always add sugar, it really depends on the tomato. So okay, so I could pretty much stop right here at this point. But I don't like texture in my tomato sauce, so I'm gonna go ahead and keep going. All right, so I use the same strainer from the veggie broth recipe and strain my sauce. All right, so it's definitely thicker than it looks. Tomato paste would give it a more reddish color, I'm assuming. And then I chop up some basil and add it to my sauce. And here is my garlic and basil tomato sauce. Alright, so this is the oven version, and right away you can see that it's so much juicier, so much liquid, and that's what I love about it. But just like the stovetop, I use a spoon and press the juice out of the tomatoes before using the blender. So I pretty much like to add my homemade tomato sauce into 70% of my recipes, whether it's stews or soups or sauces, whatever you would use tomato sauce for. I hope you guys enjoyed these 3 easy homemade recipes, and please consider subscribing for more. I'll see you guys in my next video.